All right. Bruchim Habayim. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We're going to continue Melachot Shabbat. Tonight we will continue in the laws of Kotev / Mochek, which is writing and erasing, and the various different rules that the Chachamim instituted out of a fear that somebody may come to write on Shabbat or erase on Shabbat. So tonight we're going to learn about some halachot that are, I would say, less known. And they may sound a little like, I've never heard of that before. But it's important to be aware that it does exist and to know that under certain circumstances, these things really are something that could come up. So let's jump right into it. So the Gemara tells us, Mone Adam et orchav ve'et paraperotav mipiv, aval lo mipi haketav. So literally what that means is a person, this is Gemara Shabbat Kuf Mem Chet Amud Bet. So 148b Tractate Shabbat. Mone Adam et orchav, a person is allowed to count his guests, ve'et paraperotav, and his desserts that he's planning on serving, mipiv, by mouth, aval lo min haktav, but not based on a written piece of paper. Let's say, right? Not based on. I shouldn't say paper. Not based off of writing. Min haktav. Now you say, what on earth is going on over here? Right? What is the problem? The answer is the following. There is a big question here. What is the Gemara trying to do? So there are two opinions in the Gemara. There's Rav Bibi and there's Abaye. Rav Bibi says the problem here is that if we let you read off of a piece of paper the guests that you wrote down as a reminder for yourself who or whom you would like to invite to your house. You wrote it down on a sheet of paper, right? You want to remember who to invite. So we're afraid you might take a look at the list, and as is human nature, you might say, I wanted to invite this guy. After what he did, he's off the list. And before you know it, take out that eraser and you erase his name off the list. Or person might be, I'm telling you, this is a serious issue here. Or a person might have certain things on his menu, or she might have things on her menu that she decided she wants to serve, and now she's looking at the list, and the list goes on and on. She says, I can't do all this stuff. How am I gonna serve all these desserts or all of these side dishes? Can't do it. So she decides to take a pen or take a pencil with an eraser and erase everything or erase certain things off of her list. So that is the concern. That is the way that Rav Bibi learns the concern. Welcome. Right? That's the way that he learns the concern of the Gemara. So if you want to go over the list by heart, no problem. You can go over the list by heart. If you want to read it off of writing, then we are concerned you might erase it. That is the first explanation. Then comes Abaye. Abaye says, it's not about the fear that you might erase it. Even if you were to have non-erasable writing, it would still be a problem. The reason that the Gemara says it's a problem, explains Abaye, is because we're afraid that if we let you read this kind of thing, then you may come to read other types of documents which you are not allowed to read on Shabbat. What's an example of a document which you're not allowed to read on Shabbat? So any kind of document that involves finances, like a bank statement, like a bill of debt, that is something that either you owe someone or someone owes you. These are things that are related to business, and therefore on Shabbat you may not read them. The,
the term for that is Kotev, but it means documents that involve pieces or elements of business or things that are related to business which you are not supposed to get involved in on Shabbat. So the fear over here, says Abaye, is actually nothing to do with erasing, but rather if we let you have a list that details your guests and details the food you want to serve, and you then read off of that list, says Abaye, the concern is that if you read off of that, then you will assume that since I can read this, I can also read documents that are business-related documents which are prohibited. So that's the explanation of this halakha. So which opinion does the Shulchan Aruch go with? So if you look in the halakha in Siman Shin Zayin Seif Yud Bet, he says the following: Zimen orchim ve'echin lahem minei megadim. So here's a person, he invited guests and he prepared for them all kinds of nice desserts, nice appetizing things. Ve'katav bichtav kama zimen ve'kama megadim hechin lahem. And he wrote down his list of guests, and he also wrote the list of his menu. Asur likroto b'Shabbat. He's not allowed to read that list on Shabbat. Now, if it was about erasing, then this would be so only in a situation where it would be a problem potentially of erasing the writing. But the Shulchan Aruch says even more than that. Even if this is written not on paper, but on a wall. It's written on, in other words, you decided to write on a wall. Okay, again, it's an interesting case. Okay, you wrote on a wall the list of guests and also the list of your menu, what you want to serve, and it's very high up. It's so high up that you cannot ever come to erase it because it's too high, right? So still it's asur to read it. Why? Mishum gezerah shema yikra b'Shtarei Hedyotot. Because we are afraid that if you come to read that, then you may assume that you are now permitted to read other types of documents that are business related and related to things that you cannot do on Shabbat. Dehainu, and he explains Shtarei Chovot v'Cheshbonot, which means things that are related to his debts and money-related, business-related things, Cheshbonot, calculations of things that he is involved with, right? And therefore, it's a problem. Now, he goes on to say, Aval im chakat bakotel chakika shokat. If you actually didn't just write it, but instead you etched it into the wall. I guess you were so gung-ho on having these guests and serving these items that you literally etched it into the wall. So in a chakika shokat, which means that it's impressed into the wall itself, then you would be allowed to read it because you would never confuse. You would never come to confuse this kind of writing with a document that's business related. So that would never lead you to the conclusion, oh, I'm reading this, I could also read that. No, you would never make that conclusion because you're reading something which is carved into your wall. That's something else. So he says, but if it's just on a notepad, right? Even if you etched it in, still asur likroto, you're not allowed to read it. Then Shulchan Aruch goes on to say, what are Shtarei Hedyotot? What are these commoner? Literally, Shtarei Hedyotot means the documents of a commoner, of a simple person. So he says, Hainu Shtarei Chovot v'Cheshbonot. It means documents that are related to debts, either you owe someone or he owes you, or cheshbonot, or things that are calculations, things that have, you bought, you sold, you this, you that, inventory, different things. Now, those are called Shtarei Hedyotot, and therefore they are forbidden to be read on Shabbat because The problem with those things is that if you get involved in that on Shabbat, right, you are doing a violation of what we call mimtzo chefzecha. What do we say, Kiddush Shabbat morning? It says, right, v'karata la-Shabbat oneg likdosh Hashem mechubad v'chibadeto me'asod b'rakecha. The next two words, right, mimtzo chefzecha v'daber davar. Right, mimtzo chefzecha means that a person should not be involved in his weekday mundane activities on Shabbat. So he, has a whole business that he runs and operates during the weekday. Fantastic. But on Shabbat, he should not be involved in the discussion and in the thoughts and in the just planning of that business operation. So part of that is reading these documents. So over here, Chazal were so concerned that a person will come to read his business documents that they said that even something that is like a menu and a list of guests that a person has in his writing, on his paper, he's not allowed to read on Shabbat. He can go through the list of people in his head. He can go through the list of his menu in his head, but he cannot read it off of paper. Why? It's a decree of Shtarei Hedyotot.
It's very difficult not to engage in conversations with people. Like, let's say if somebody talks to you, it could be a relative, it could be a friend, it could be your kids.
Okay.
It's very difficult to just shut people up.
You
know what I mean?
You mean
To
when you're
tell
talking
them-
about business? They want to talk to you about business?
But about I don't know. Let's say you want to you're gonna do something during the week or ask you all these conversations.
It's
Unless
very
I'm
easy.
talking
It's
to
very
a
easy.
rabbi.
It's very easy. All you
Unless
gotta
I'm
do,
talking to a rebbitzin or
say-
a rabbi.
right?
David, I don't feel like they get it.
What?
I don't know. I feel like I'm going to offend people.
Okay, so
Unless I'm talking to
so
a
you
rabbi.
say, you know what? It's Shabbat today. I don't want to worry about this stuff. I don't have to worry about it on Shabbat. Let's change the subject in a very light, calm way. You know what I mean?
But if you do engage in any conversations with people,
Mhm.
are you doing an Avirah? Is it an Avirah? Or
If
is it
you-
just not
so-
proper?
So look, I'll read to you the halacha inside. Okay. Let me read it to you inside, just so that you have it clear. One second, guys. יכול לומר לחברו לקרח פלוני אני הולך מחר. You could tell somebody, I'm going to this location tomorrow, right? וכן מותר לומר לו לך עמי לקרח פלוני מחר, כיוון שהיום יכול ללך על ידי בורגנין. The halacha says you're allowed to talk about anything that you can do on Shabbat. And there is a way technically of getting there. Let's say if you had to walk by foot, you could technically reach that location. So therefore, if there's any permissible way to do it on Shabbat, then you're allowed to talk about it. Says Maran, אבל בדבר שאין בו צד היתר לעשותו היום. But if there's something which is, if you want to talk about something which is absolutely forbidden to do today, in other words, there is no way of doing that unless you do a melacha. אפילו אם אין בו אלא איסור דרבנן, even if the only way of doing it is in violation of a rabbinic rule. כגון שיש לו חוץ לתחום פירות מוקצים. Let's say you have outside of the tchum, which is the 2,000 amot outside of the city, you've got a location with some kind of fruits that are out there. So כיוון שאי אפשר לו להביאם היום, since you cannot bring them from that location, from there to here today, אסור לומר לחברו שיביאם לו למחר. You would not be allowed to tell your friend today, do me a favor, tomorrow, can you go get me those fruit from wherever that is? Because you yourself cannot do that. So therefore you cannot even mention that you want him to do that for you. So that's the rule. The rule is on Shabbat, if you cannot do it, if it's 100% forbidden to do, then you should not be talking about it. Unless there are certain exceptions. I'll give you an example. Let's say it's a mitzvah, right? That you could talk about, even if it involves melacha, right? You want to talk about some kind of a mitzvah that needs to get done. I don't know, we have to take care of this, I don't know, the Eruv wire snapped. Let's go fix it right after Shabbat. Okay, no problem. That's a mitzvah. The mikveh needs to get, I don't know, checked before they use it again. Let's go do that after Shabbat. Yes, technically maybe, or it needs to get fixed. You can't fix it on Shabbat, you can fix it after. The point being that for a mitzvah, you would be allowed to speak about it.
What about getting a recipe?
So a recipe
could be a mitzvah, like it's a for a
No.
mitzvah.
That's a stretch, right? A recipe is not a mitzvah.
If you like somebody's cake or cookies.
That's a lovely thing. So you could talk about cooking. That brings you joy, right? That's okay. But at the same time, you
look
cannot
at recipes from cookbooks, because I like to do that also on Shabbat. Like to read like your recipes and ask your kids. Like I asked my kids, would you like me to make this?
That's a great
like,
question.
During the week,
That's a great question.
It's like it's my time with them, and also
we're gonna get to stuff like that in a moment. We're gonna get to stuff like that in just a moment. But again, I just want to make clear the general rule on Shabbat. If it's Melacha related, if you're talking about something that you can only do by means of Melacha, you should not do that on Shabbat. You should not talk about it on Shabbat. Okay?
So we can't talk about recipes.
So no, I didn't say that.
Or I can't like.
No, I did not say that. Let me explain. You can't talk about cooking. The act of cooking, right, is a melacha you can't do on Shabbat, right? And if you're talking about an act of cooking that you want to actually do, that's talking about a melacha that you cannot do on Shabbat. So it's a problem, right? If you're talking about things that you plan on doing, and it's melacha, and you're talking about that on Shabbat, that's an issue. That's what he's saying over here. He's telling this guy, I want you to go tomorrow to get my fruit. Well, going tomorrow to get the fruit, you're telling him to do it after Shabbat, of course, but you're talking about something which cannot be done on Shabbat, right? And you're telling him to do that after Shabbat. So you can't do that. That's the idea. Is it clear?
So should you not read recipe books?
Okay, forget about the rest. 1 second.
But can you?
1 second. We'll get there in a second. Hold on. Just 1 second, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So let's just get the idea for a second about what it is that is forbidden. Okay? So first of all, we've learned about Shtarei Hedyotot. Shtarei Hedyotot are the documents that are business related, or any kind of document that is being read in order to deal with things that are mundane and related to your business in the weekday. That's forbidden. And now we're taking it a step further and saying that a person can't even read something that is a document that's not business related, that is merely for the purpose of going through the calculation of who he invited and what he has on his menu, because that would lead him to read business related documents. So it's a very kind of, right? It's a serious thing. We wouldn't really think that it's ever a problem. Now, Chazal took it, again, the Shulchan Aruch has a lot of different things in this realm of halacha. And that is the following. Again, it's also, whether it's about erasing or whether it's about business, both of them fall under the category of either erasing or writing. If you remember, we learned that business is actually a problem out of the reason Chazal made it asur is because of the fear you might come to write things down, right? You remember that, guys? So that's also important. So it's either erasing or writing, but it's one of the two. And like we said, of course, it's also a problem of being involved in things that are not Shabbat related on Shabbat. Okay, so now let's continue with this issue of halachot. So look at this very interesting halacha. Kotel o vilon sheyesh bo tzurot chayot meshunot. There's a wall or a tapestry that has on it some kind of picture, some kind of image. Shel bnei adam, shel maasim kigon milchemet David veGoliath. Let's say on the wall they painted a picture of the battle between King David and Goliath. The Kotvim, and they write a caption underneath. Zu tzurat ploni. This is the image of King David. V'zed yukan ploni, and this is Goliath. Says Maran, you can't read the caption on Shabbat. Asur likrot bo b'Shabbat. You can't read the caption on Shabbat. Now, this is a very interesting, again, application of this rule. Why is this the rule? The reason, again, is because of this idea of Shtarei Hedyotot. In other words, there is a fear that if we let you read what it says over here, you may conclude that you're also allowed to read Shtarei Hedyotot, the business-related documents. So what Shulchan Aruch essentially did over here is he is saying that any picture with a caption underneath, you cannot read. That's a very heavy statement. I don't know if you guys are following what it's saying over here. What? Again, I'm not even saying any chidushim. I'm saying Maran. Now, obviously, this presents for us a very big challenge, because what this is saying is that you cannot look at a picture and read the caption underneath. I mean, it's basically, word for word what Shulchan Aruch is saying. He says an example. If they have a picture of David and Goliath, so then you have to make sure that you don't read the caption that says this is David and this is Goliath. So I want you to know, the first time that I ever learned this halacha, I was going through this and I was very nervous, because basically everything that we have as far as Jewish magazines and anything that we've got, it's all pictures with captions. There's nothing else besides for pictures. Some people don't even read the articles; they just look at the picture and read the caption, right? So over here, Rabotai, I want you to know, I found one opinion that is lenient in this respect, and that is the Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham over here comes in to save the day. And what he does, this is the Magen Avraham actually in a different siman, Shin Aleph Siv Katan Daled. What he does is he explains that as long as the person is doing it for his personal pleasure, okay, then it is allowed to read it. So even though, in other words, he says there are some times where there are rules in Shabbat that you cannot do certain things. For example, it says you're not supposed to work up a sweat on Shabbat. It says you're not supposed to bring yourself to overloaded work on Shabbat. That's a clear halakha. Because Shabbat there's a certain element of tir chayetera, which means not overdoing it, being, enjoying the Shabbat and having some rest. Now, it says though, however, that if you're a young man and you're playing around and you enjoy yourself, so then you're allowed to do it, because this is an enjoyment for you. You enjoy that work, you enjoy that sweating, you're enjoying it, so therefore it's permissible. Says the Magen Avraham, that idea applies here too. Welcome. That idea applies here as well. So what that would mean is that if you take a look at this picture and you say, hey, I want to know what's in this picture. Who's that guy? Who's that person? What's this army? What's this war? What's going on over here? And you're upset. You don't understand what's going on. So reading this caption is actually alleviating that for you and helping you to understand what's in the picture. Says the Magen Avraham, that's okay. So the condition to make it okay is that as long as you are reading the caption for your pleasure to enjoy and understand what's going on, that's okay. Yes.
Wait, so when we were Melacha and cooking, you said that it's easier to if you can refrain, then you should.
Yeah.
Even if we found it there's a wise period, you have a head there and whatever.
So I think I saw Chacham Ovadia quoted also as going with it, so therefore I feel happy. Yeah. Look, the answer is you're right. If you can refrain and you don't read it, tavo alayich beracha, blessing should come on you. But at the same time, I just know that we have so many of these things all around us, it's almost like impossible to avoid it. Any publication, anything that you have, it's always with pictures with caption. The Shulchan Aruch is telling us over here clearly that it's a big problem. So it turns out that according to what we're saying now, it will indeed be a problem if when you look at it, you're reading it, but you're not enjoying it. You're not getting any pleasure from it. In other words, if you don't really care what it says there, to read the caption, it turns out it's going to be asur. But if you are curious and you want to know what's going on in that picture, and this is going to explain to you what's going on in the picture, that, says the Magen Avraham, for your pleasure is allowed. It's allowed to do that. So, and I did see that Chacham Vadia does bring down this Magen Avraham. So it's just sometimes you know the situation. Here, let's see if he brings it. Yeah. So for that reason, he says, if somebody is lenient, he has what to rely on, and that's Chazon Ovadia, Shabbat Chelik Vav. So Chacham Ovadia brings it down. So I was happy to be in his company as well. Baruch Hashem. I will tell you this, though. I will tell you this. Any publication that has, and this is also a big problem, and you got to be very careful about this, okay? This is definitely something which we would, yes, consider to be the category of Shtarei Hedyotot, of business documents and things like that. Advertisements, okay? Advertisements are 100% asur to read on Shabbat, believe it or not, right? It's very hard. It's the biggest michshol when you have any of these publications, and every other page is another ad. And these are things that people sit down to read on Shabbat, on Yom Tov. And you're not supposed to. You're not supposed to read the ads on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Same thing with these calendars. Exactly what I'm saying. But Shpacha magazine, all these publications, all they do is have ads for Passover in Switzerland, and ads for this and that and whatever, all these different things. These are business advertisements. So you're more than welcome to read them on, Thursday, Friday, Sunday, but Shabbat, don't read those. You cannot read those. Those are 100% Shtarei Hedyotot according to all opinions. You have to skip over those. It's a tough one. It's a very tough one, to be honest with you, because every time you want to read an article, the next page is a big ad. What, you're not going to look? Of course you're going to look. Same thing with these calendars. It's against the halacha. So whatever we call that. Yeah. So therefore, the idea is that you cannot read those things on Shabbat. That definitely falls in the category of Shtarei Hedyotot. It's a big problem. Yes.
Is the source for not being able to look at advertisements because of the Shtarei Hedyotot, or because you don't plan to then do those things? I would think it definitely falls in the category of Shtarei Hedyotot, business-related documents, because it's a question, it's an ad, they're trying to get your business.
But a lot of times they also have articles on Divrei Torah and all these things.
100% correct.
So
sorry, are you cold? You want to turn off the air? Want to turn off the AC? Yeah, more than welcome to. Okay.
Can you read that? It has
Divrei Torah, absolutely you can read. You would just have to make sure to skip the advertisements.
So would it, when things are, or would the publication be muksa?
No, that's a good question, though. That's a good question, because that's a great question. The answer is no, because since it has also things which you are allowed to read, and those things are more important to you than what you are not allowed to read, so it's considered to be one general permissible.
Or wouldn't it be like Psik Reisha?
No, because
you can't
I just have to
go through it and not see it, and
but I mean,
chopping off the head of the chicken and then
it could be avoided. That's the thing. It's not necessarily going to happen. If you look at it, and you just turn the page, you could technically avoid it. I'm just trying to point out that according to all opinions, it's a problem. That's the same reason that, let's say ads on the calendars.
Everywhere.
On the calendars, you always have advertisements. And I always walk by and I see, advertisements on the calendar. Technically on Shabbat, you're not supposed to read those, right?
But even my children, they'll read things outside on Shabbat. There's advertisements on trucks or.
Yes, very valid point. So again, kids are kids. They're not bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. They're not yet responsible for their actions. But we, at least, the adults,
so we
should make sure. Well, let's first work on ourselves. Let's first work on on ourselves that when we see an advertisement in a magazine, we skip it. That itself is very hard to do. I tell you personally, you see, flight to Israel, El Al, $5.99 both directions is whoa, $5. I gotta book a ticket, right away, Motzei Shabbat. That's the first thing that I'm thinking. Now realize, wait a second, I was not supposed to look at that on Shabbat, right? Those are advertisements. A lot of shuls have a problem like that, where they have a publication every week that they put out, a newsletter or something, and they get advertisements and they put it out. Now again, technically, there's no problem to read it on Thursday, Friday, Sunday, and the rest of the week. So I guess the assumption that they have is that people are well versed enough to know that you read the schedule, the part of the schedule that's related to Shabbat on Shabbat, but the ads you skip on Shabbat. I guess they're hoping that that's what people will do. But that's important for us to be aware of too. Yes. So regarding your recipes, right? So I think the answer to your question is that if looking at a picture and then seeing what's inside of it, and say, oh, that's such a good idea, it's such a nice idea, if that brings you personal pleasure, so then the Magen Avraham would say, you're allowed to look at that picture, you're allowed to see the recipe, and that's it.
But
It's
let's
okay.
say also it's.
But
like
if you,
for-
let's say, if you,
Because it's hard for me to feed my children, like it's hard, like it's a challenge, so, like. And on Shabbat, they can't like have any technology or anything, so there's not as much distractions. So sometimes I'll go bring my cookbooks. And I'll say, well, you like to have this, would you like to have
that's
this?
so nice. So,
But, because it's frustrating for me.
okay.
But like,
But my
if
point is,
I don't plan to make that for Shabbat, if I plan to make that for the week for them. So is that like,
so you're
am I
saying you're planning right now to select a dish from here that you want to cook. Okay, so here's
For
what
the
you do.
week,
So
not for
here's what
Shabbat.
you do. Here's what you do. Don't use the word cook. Say, do you like this dish? Do you think it's gonna be good? Okay, let's work with that one.
but my
Right?
intention is.
Okay,
for-
but again, the key is you're not saying the word cook, bake, right? You're not talking about melacha. You're talking about a dish that looks good. Okay, it's fine. Now, I'm just trying to point out that it could have been a problem of Shtarei Hedyotot, of what's falling into the category of things that could lead you to read business documents. Again, never in my life would I think that a list of guests and a list of a menu is
Could
going
you
to be.
put a menu on the table?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
That's a
menu,
very
like
good question.
pretty little
So
menu.
yeah, so over here, I just want to finish the thought. I would never think that that's a problem of something that would lead me to read business-related documents, right? But that's what Shulchan Aruch is telling us is a problem. So what we're learning now is that there are certain things that fall into a category, which is a new category. Things that themselves are not business-related documents, but if you read them, they can make you think that you are allowed to read business-related documents. You understand? So
Because
that
if you go
menu,
also to
that menu is a
program-
part of that. So therefore, the answer to your question, it would seem to be, is that if you are the host, and remember, I want to point this out about this halacha, this is only talking about the host. So if you are a guest that's reading a menu, that would not be a problem at all, because you have no intention of erasing, you have no intention of, it's not your document, it's not something that you think it's not something which will cause you to conclude that you are now, I could read my list of guests, I could read my list of desserts, so I could read my invoice and I could read my inventory. You're not the person in charge of that. You're just a guest here. So therefore, as a guest, there is no problem. So therefore, the menu on the table for a guest to read it would not be a problem. For the host to read it would be a problem.
Wow.
Understand? Because the host is the one that is the master of ceremonies over here. He's the one that is he's the one in charge of everything, and he's the fellow that we are afraid will make the wrong conclusion that if he could read this list, he could also read his business lists, right? But the guest who's showing up is not somebody who potentially would make changes to the list or do something else with the list He's just a guy who's showing up and seeing what the host is going to serve him. It's okay. You understand the difference between the two? Yes.
Can we read a recipe to follow it?
And make it on Shabbat?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It's necessary for Shabbat. Sure. Okay. So therefore, there is room to be lenient with the captions, with the picture of the captions. One detail about that, however, is that you should not read the caption out loud. He does say that. He says if you want to just enjoy the benefit of the caption for your personal pleasure, then you could do that, but don't read the caption out loud. So again, this is a realm of like halacha that is, I don't think, spoken about so much, but I'll just give you an idea of the extent to which this halacha was discussed in the poskim. Believe it or not, there's an argument amongst the poskim as to whether or not you're allowed to read street signs on Shabbat. Okay? Street signs. Okay? Now, what's the question over here? Again, this is a question about whether or not the street sign, if I read these signs, will I now be prohibited? Will I now conclude that I can also read business-related documents? Again, it sounds a little bit far-fetched, but that's the discussion amongst the poskim. So what we come out with is the following. This is what Chacham Ovadia explains. He says, again, if you read it with your eyes and you don't say it out with your mouth, right? And you also need to know where you're going. You want to know that you're making the right turn. So in other words, it's something which you need. So then the halacha will sanction the reading of street signs on Shabbat. But it would turn out that if you know exactly where you're going and you don't need to read the street sign, right? Then technically there's room to be machmir and say not to read it. It's a very amazing thing. Again, I'm going into a realm of halacha I don't think is spoken about so much. This is the world of Shtarei Hedyotot, business documents. So I'll read it to you inside. He says like this. This is again from Chazon Ovadia. He says, "Achafetz la'agia l'rchov ploni ve'eno yodea echan." You don't know where you're going, so you need the street signs. Utar lechatchila, you're allowed, no problem. You could read the street signs, you could read the house numbers, no problem. But it's better that you have the following two conditions. He says, number one, read it with your eyes. Don't announce the street name with your mouth. Number two, he says, this is only on condition that you don't know the name of the street. That is the best way to read, to follow this rule. He goes on to say, he says, Chacham Ovadia was very lenient, and he says, technically you don't, even if you don't have these conditions, it's okay. Which means go out and see what people do. You see, there's a concept in halacha also, which is to take a look around you and see what is done by most people. And there's no question on earth that everybody reads street signs on Shabbat. It's not even like there's no question about it. So there's a reason for that, right? That's important to remember as well. There's a reason why there's a certain trend amongst people. Because as you know, Am Yisrael is a holy nation. It says, Im enam neviim, b'nei neviim. If they're not prophets, they're sons of prophets or daughters of prophets. So therefore, there's a reason why people are not careful about it. And Chacham Ovadia explained that technically it's not a problem. So therefore, Rabotai, we hold that street signs are okay to read on Shabbat. But ideally, like he said, ideally don't announce the name of the street with your mouth. And ideally, it should be that you don't know where you're going. If you do know where you're going, it would be better not to read it. Again, if it's hard for you, then don't worry about it. Okay? Fine. Clear? It just goes to show you that sometimes the laws of Shabbat, they can get very detailed. And it's so important to learn the laws of Shabbat in order to be aware that the issue even exists. You know what I'm saying? Without even coming to the shiur, who would have ever even heard
that's an issue. That's why all of us, we have to make sure to always learn and continue learning, because that's the only way we will know what Hashem wants from us. Okay, let's continue. Big question that comes up, again, in the same realm of halacha, is somebody allowed to study for an exam on Shabbat? Again, talking about things that are not related to Shabbat. So the Rambam writes that a person should only study Torah on Shabbat. Shabbat was given for the study of Torah, not for other things. However, others, the Rashba and others, they felt that you're allowed to study any kind of chokhmah, any kind of wisdom. You want to study astrology, you want to study science, you want to study anything like a wisdom out there, no problem to study it on Shabbat. Shulchan Aruch brings down the Rambam and says that the Rambam's opinion was only Torah. And he says, and somebody says, according to Rashba, that technically you could study sciences as well. So the general rule is, whenever the Shulchan Aruch lays down the law and says, and somebody says, he means to tell you to follow the first opinion, which is only Torah. That's usually the way that he works. But the poskim do say, Chacham Vadia brings down, that if, let's say, you have somebody that is pressed for time, let's say somebody is taking an exam to be certified as a doctor, as a physician, what's that called? The boards?
Yeah.
Right? Trying to go through the boards. Okay? So he's pressed for time, they're coming up, and he needs this time to study. He has to study. So then if there's really a situation where he must do so, and again, he's studying a wisdom, I'm not talking about studying, let's say, law, right? So he's studying biology, he's studying science, he's studying astrology, some kind of a wisdom, right? So then the halacha will permit him to go ahead and to rely on the other more lenient opinions in a time of need like that. Okay? Fine. Very good. Let's move on to some more issues in the laws of mechika, erasing. Let's say somebody wrote something on his hand. He wrote down a phone number, he wrote down a name, something on his hand on Friday afternoon, and he forgot about it. And now it's Friday night, time to wash netilat yadayim, and he sees a phone number on his hand. He's afraid that by washing the hands, he will actually, when you wash and you dry it with a towel, possible that he will be erasing the phone number, might be erasing the name on his hand, and therefore he wants to know, is he allowed to do so or not? So the answer is the following. The average ink, let's say pen, ink that we have nowadays, usually if you just pour water on it, it's not going to come off. Usually there's a certain amount of soap that needs to get scrubbed in, and you have to dry it, and then it starts coming off. But just to pour water, usually it's not going to come off. And why is that an important point? Because if, let's say, it did come off, then that would be what we would call davar she'eno mitkaven. You didn't have in mind for that to happen. Therefore, even if it did, it's fine, because it wasn't necessarily going to happen, right? So therefore, it's going to be okay to wash your hands. Now, Chacham Ovadia suggests an important rule. He says, there's a rule in the laws of Netilat Yadayim that says, normally the way that we wash is we wash our hands 1, 2, and 3, and then 1, 2, and 3. And then we say the blessing, and then we dry our hands. So Chacham Ovadia says a very nice point. He says, the whole reason that we do it 1, 2, and 3 is because we want to make sure that if there was a small amount of water the first time on our hands that got mixed in with whatever dirt, whatever stuff was there, and that water became quote unquote impure, so then we wash it again the second time and the third time, make sure all of it comes off, right? And then we go ahead and we dry it to make sure that even if there was some of that left over, it's all gone off of our hands now. So it's all part of that big process. He says, but if you learn Masechet Yadayim, so then you'll learn an interesting rule. The idea that you are required to dry your hands is only when you use an amount of water smaller than a revi'it, which is 3 ounces. But once you use 3 ounces of water at one shot,
then you don't need to dry your hands at all, because it's such a large amount of water, which is not really that much, just 3 ounces, but it's enough water to be considered making your entire hand pure at one shot. So when you use a large amount of water, one shot, you rotate your hands. Technically, if you do so on both of your hands, you don't need to dry your hands. So says Chacham Vadia, if a person finds himself with writing on his hands, and he's afraid that if he dries his hands, it will erase the writing, so then just use a large amount of water and don't dry your hands. Keep them wet. You can still say the beracha, and you're all good. Why? Because when you have that amount of water, then you don't need to dry your hands. Very nice suggestion from Chacham Vadia. Zecher Tzadik Libracha. And again, even if it did come off, since it was not necessarily going to come off, it would be considered a davar she'eino mitkaven, and therefore it would be okay. Okay. A lady is allowed to remove makeup on Shabbat. No problem, right? You want to wash it off?
That's not erasing.
No, that's considered to be okay. I just want to point out, by the way, remember in the laws of erasing, remember that the act of erasing is a destructive act. The only reason that it would be considered to be a melacha, constructive, is because of the fact that you are erasing for the purpose of writing. Right? You're trying to erase a couple of things in order to write. So over here, remember that when the person wrote on his hand, if you erase that, since you're not trying to make room for other letters, technically at worst, it's only rabbinic. So it's important to remember that too, because it's not really erasing for the purpose of writing. The same thing over here. When you remove makeup, so makeup is a question of sovea. When you put makeup on your skin, you are coloring your skin. Now, when you remove makeup from your skin, there's no halacha that says that that it's a problem to remove the color, right? We know that by writing, it says problem to remove the writing if you want to, you clear out the writing by erasing it in order to make room for more writing. Over here, so that does not have an opposite melacha of uncoloring. So for that reason, technically, one is allowed to go ahead and remove the color from their face. They can wash off their face in the morning and all the makeup comes off, no problem. However, I did see brought down that nail polish is a little bit different. Nail polish should not be removed on Shabbat with nail polish remover. Nail polish on a nail, I believe, is something a lot more stuck, more sturdy. It's not like, it's not like the makeup on the skin, which kind of just comes off. It's there on the nail and it's not going anywhere for a while. So to take off the nail polish on Shabbat is actually considered to be a problem. Yes.
So for the makeup, what can we use to take it off? Because a lot of these things are like, you need oil based, or you need a little baby wine, or you can't just use water to take off.
Water you can't use?
No.
Okay. So a baby wipe depends. Right?
People are, if you don't squeeze it, you can.
So remember, the baby wipes, we said that if it's a very, very, very wet baby wipe, and you don't have to squeeze it, just kind of, pressing very gently, that would be allowed if that helps. I don't know if it would help. Yeah. Cleanser, like is it like a liquid? It's okay.
It's not the problem of smearing. We understand if it doesn't absorb into our skin and we smear on.
Is it liquidy?
So it's like a gel. It's like a gel.
It's like a soap.
Yeah, it's just like soap. It's for your face. You scrub it on. And
so that's okay. We hold you could use that gel soap on Shabbat.
Like smearing.
Triple paste is a diaper rash.
Diaper rash.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a smear. Yeah.
But
but that's a solid. That's not liquidy, right? If you were to put that liquid, let's say, on the table, it would just kind of right. It wouldn't stay a solid, right? So okay, good. Let's go. Now, let's talk more about erasing on Shabbat. You're allowed to walk on chalk. Let's say,
creams on Shabbat.
well, we spoke about that. The idea of if the lotion sinks into your skin, we said it's not a problem of smearing on Shabbat. Okay, walking on chalk. Let's say the kids wrote with chalk on the pavement, and you want to walk on that, even though you might be erasing it. We hold that that is permissible. The reason being that, first of all, it's not necessarily going to erase it, and even if it was, this writing was not meant to last, and therefore it's worse the derabanan, and since you didn't mean it, and it doesn't really make a difference to you anyway. So therefore, it is permissible. It's not writing for the purpose of, it's not erasing for the purpose of writing, and therefore, it's a lot of reasons why you'd be allowed to walk on that chalk on the pavement. If wax ever falls on letters on a book, there's a question amongst the poskim if you're allowed to scrape it off. So Chacham Vadia held that you are allowed to scrape it off, and therefore it's not a problem. Others were machmir. Technically, we hold that it's not considered to be a problem. Okay. Now, there are certain things that you might think is erasing, but technically is okay. I've seen napkins that say Shabbat Shalom on them, right? Can you wipe your face with that, or blow your nose at that, right? Is that considered to be erasing the Shabbat Shalom? I think the answer is no. It's still there. It's just becoming dirty. So I wouldn't call that an active erasing. I think that also, even if some of it does actually kind of break up, maybe some part of the napkin like started to rip or whatever, I wouldn't call that erasing. I would say that you didn't have that in mind, and if it did erase, it's with a shinui. You didn't mean it. It's a very weird way to erase. And again, that erasing is not for the purpose of writing. So there are a bunch of reasons why that would be okay. By the way, you should know that if anything is ever written in Kotev Ashurit means the letters of a Sefer Torah. If you ever open up a Sefer Torah, you see the way the letters are written. So those items that are written with those letters have to be treated with a certain level of sanctity. Like if you ever have Shabbat Shalom napkins written with that type of a letter, like in the Sefer Torah style, don't use those, because there's a kedusha that they have, even if it's got nothing, even if it's writing about, let's say, the Yankees, right? With those letters, those are special letters. You're not supposed to write about the Yankees with those letters, but if you did, then they're holy. They have to be treated with a certain kedusha. You shouldn't throw them out just like that. You have to separately throw them in somewhere else, in a respectful way. So let's say you had a Hebrew newspaper with letters, not like the regular Hebrew letters, but the Kotev Ashurit letters. If they had those letters in that Hebrew newspaper, you should not take that newspaper and use it to cover, I don't know, the fish or something. You know what I'm saying? You should not throw it out just like that. Those letters have a certain kedusha to them. They have a certain sanctity to them. So you have to treat it with that kedusha. Okay. We spoke, I believe, about eating foods that have letters on them, right? Okay, so just to review very briefly, if it has like a tea biscuit that has letters on it, you could crunch into it and eat it, no problem. If it is a cupcake with letters on it, we said you could crunch into it, eat it, no problem. Can you slice a cake that has happy birthday on it? That we said is a machloket poskim. And we hold technically that you are allowed to. Ideally, if you can avoid the issue by having it put on a sheet, happy birthday on a chocolate, and then you remove the chocolate bar and then cut, that would be much better. But if you already have it and everyone wants to eat the cake, enjoy the cake. Go ahead. It's all good. Why? Because again, it's writing that wasn't meant to last. It's not for the purposes of rewriting, and therefore when you're doing it, technically it is permissible to go ahead and to do that. Okay. I think we could stop over here unless you have any questions.
You're not allowed to water your plants or your garden on Shabbat, right?
No. Great. Okay, guys. Thank you for joining us.